It's my pleasure to welcome Professor Yamane for our second conversation. The last time we spoke was, I don't know, 2 years past or something like this. So I wanted to say hello again and get a feel for your current thoughts and run through a few topics. I might ask first, from where are you speaking to us today?
So I'm in Kyoto, Japan today, and I'm here basically uh, in Japan for the academic year.
That's
So I'm both
wonderful.
doing both teaching and teaching here, and I'm also doing research because I'm primarily a macroeconomist, and for a macroeconomist, I think Japan is at the sort of the forefront of the major economies, both in good ways and in bad. So it's facing, a declining population. It's facing an aging population. It's got the largest national debt as a percent of GDP in the world. Interest rates are negative. They'll probably become positive shortly, but they're negative right now. And so the country's really pushed, fiscal policy, monetary policy to the limits. And so I think it's a fascinating place to be because the rest of the world is will soon be right exactly sort of where Japan is, facing a declining aging population, declining population, really reaching the limits of sort of fiscal policy and monetary policy. So I'm trying to understand sort of what's going on here. I think the rest of the world will want to know very shortly.
So what does that say about the United States and what sort of time frame when you make that link? Uh,
Because we see the same thing happening. Obviously, the population in the United States is aging as well. The national debt is quite high. It's not as high as in Japan, but it's still very high, and that puts limits on the ability of the government to certainly borrow money and fund budget deficits. And so, so eventually, the United States will be facing exactly the same problems. Social Security is obviously already, it's a problem in Japan. It will very shortly be a big problem in the United States. I think we're all aware of that. I think we all want to look at Japan to understand how they manage all these pressures, and see what lessons we can learn for the United States.
is there a singular lesson that stands out that we ought to take note of?
Um, I would only say that particularly in demographics, we know you can predict pretty much. We have a pretty good idea of what's going to happen to the demographics of a society, and certainly a few years out, and so we have time to prepare for that.
Right.
It's not like an earthquake that just sort of happens, um, so I think we really need to sort of plan ahead. That'd be one lesson. So Japan's certainly been working like raising the retirement age. Japan's in the process has been doing that for quite some time now, trying to increase tax revenue. They've been doing that for several decades now. But yeah, we need to be proactive.
And that proactivity, would your recommendation for the US in 2024-25 to seriously start considering raising the retirement age,
Yes.
you
Oh,
know,
certainly. Yeah.
and what prescription would that be? Is it frame that for me?
Um, it's tricky, right? And so it's tricky in the United States because Um, I think one big problem in the United States is let's say, is if I look at life expectancy for college graduates versus life expectancy for non-college graduates, it's really diverged in the last decade or so. And it's also startling that over the last several years, life expectancy in the United States has been going down. I mean, that's kind of unheard of. I mean, it could happen during a war or something like that, but it doesn't
It's not COVID.
historically uh, a little bit, but that's you don't see it in other countries around the world. Generally, life expectancy just rises over time as as our incomes rise and standard of living rises. But in the United States, it's been going south mostly because of the opioid problems, and so 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 trying to raise the retirement age at a time when, let's say, the life expectancy of college graduates is still going up, but it, it's actually come down recently, but generally it's still been going up. But for non-college grads, it's been going down. Uh, that's a tricky thing because you're now asking, let's say, you're kind of setting up a system where only college graduates get to enjoy Social Security benefits and non-college graduates don't. That doesn't seem very fair. So I think you'd have to come up with a system where retirement age sort of might depend on sort of income and profession, things like that. So it's a little something that I think in the United States might be a little more complicated than in Japan because we don't see those kinds of divergences in Japan.
Mm-hmm. And that's as much cultural as political?
Uh, yes, I mean, politically, uh, I would point to France, which has had all these protests. They're trying to raise the retirement age, and people just like are protesting on the street, um, and their retirement age is lower than in the United States. So actually, overall, general right, since people are living longer, you think that we need to raise the retirement age if you want to fund something like Social Security. So, as a general principle, I think that's a good idea, but one has to be careful how we actually implement that.
Mm-hmm. So you've sent me a few articles, the topic being education in the U.S. and the like. And before we get to that, I wanted to mention, so you published a book, Statistics for Economists, and I read the first, the introduction and the like. And if I understand your message, it's that everybody should take an economics and statistics course so that we can look at the world with a little more, perhaps a mathematical framework or a logical framework and the like. And,
Yeah.
If that's, I'll ask you to, if I summarize that properly, and then I actually have a stats question before we move to the articles in education specifically.
Sure. Yes, I think every college student should certainly take a statistics class. It should certainly be taught in high school. I actually think the math curriculum in the United States is misguided because the way math is taught in the United States, the whole point is to get people to understand calculus, right? That's sort of the goal of the whole system. Whereas most of us never use calculus in our daily lives. I use it as as an academic economist, but most people like never use calculus.
Now,
But we
when
use
you say that though,
statistics.
is it calculus? Sorry to interrupt. Rate of change to think of the world that way, or is it something beyond that?
Excuse me, like in what's
Well,
as a tool, as a mathematical tool. Somehow the math curriculum wants American students to understand how to use calculus. If you want to maximize functions, certainly understand rates of change, yeah, it's useful. But most of us don't need to use calculus on a daily basis. But we do, every single one of us, need to understand statistics. And so I think the math curriculum in any country should be geared toward getting everyone in the country to understand basic statistics.
mm-hmm.
And so this textbook that I wrote is designed for, particularly for my students in the Claremont colleges who are bright students, but maybe necessarily don't. Um, uh, and I think so. Everyone at the Claremont College, I think, should take a course in statistics. The problem is that most of the textbooks out there are either pitched too high or too low, I think, for our students. So there are ones that have us basically assume calculus and say linear algebra in order to prove everything, and most of our students have not certainly have not taken linear algebra, and they don't. They may or may not have taken calculus, and nevertheless, I think they need to learn statistics. At the other end, there are textbooks out there that are pitched too low, and they just sort of give you these black boxes which you just plug in, and that I think is very problematic because students don't really understand where these what's going on in these black boxes, and they just start plugging in numbers without understanding what they're really doing, and so then they come up with a result which makes no sense whatsoever, and not understand that it makes no sense whatsoever, and so in this textbook I prove everything from first principles, without using any calculus or statistics, so that people actually understand why we're doing what we're doing, and so that they have a better understanding of the data that they're looking at, uh, and they can make appropriate
Mhm.
decisions. But
So when you write a textbook like this, and what is the the goal, or are you looking to see universities and colleges pick it up and use it as part of curriculum? And how does that work? I have no idea. Has it been picked up? Did you pre-order, or how? What's going on?
um, yeah, I guess the idea is it's just I just so there's nothing. I say I found that there's nothing new in the book. Right? It's all information that's sort of out there, that other people have, these are all proofs that other people have come up with. And so I just putting it in one place. It's a relatively short book, and gets to the main points, I think, pretty
Sure.
quickly. I think there's some stat books out there that, several other, like 1,000 pages long, but this is only, it's a small book. It's only a couple hundred pages. Um, and so the idea is this, so obviously then other so then um, any professor in the country could just sort of use it to teach the first course in statistics.
Mhm.
um,
Yeah, and the storytelling element that you've brought to it is very helpful. I mean, I will tell you that through undergraduate and graduate school, I believe I took 3 statistics courses, and I've had basic math, calculus 1, 2, that sort of thing. But I got to the first few pages of the book here, and there's a chart that is table 1.1, causes of death, lifetime odds of dying in the U.S. as of 2021. So I look at this, and I'm going to ask a question about because of what's been in the news, dying from a gun assault, and so 1 in 208. So what does that mean actually? I mean, I thought through it. I'm like, all right, so I've had stats, and I've been around for a while. What does that actually mean? Does that mean that on any given day, or how do I look at this chart? How do I think about a number like that versus, from dying in a bicycle accident, 1 in 3,546?
yeah, so in any particular day you're much more likely to be killed by gunfire than to say die in a bicycle accident. um, so just to help people sort of understand the relative risks that are out there. And I think sometimes we worry too much about, like, you might, and so the example I think I use in the book is that, so every now and then there would be something, um, uh, and I remember, this is many years ago, there might be say a terrorist incident in Europe. And then afterwards, all these Americans will cancel their European vacations because of this terrorist incident, which really doesn't make any sense. I mean, because the odds of getting killed by a terrorist are really minuscule. Like millions and millions of Americans travel abroad, and basically 99.999% of them never get killed by a terrorist. And so when an incident like that, that's not a very, I think, a rational response to those kinds of incidents. So you're much more likely, it's much more dangerous, say, driving to the airport.
Right.
um, and thousands of people die, 35,000 in car accidents every single year. So that's a much more dangerous activity than going on vacation in Europe.
Right. But
So,
to
so just to keep those kinds of things in perspective.
right.
Um,
And in
so I
doing
remember,
so, though,
other
is that
things.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, doing like growing up, well, raising my family in California, we had, like many people do in California, we had a pool in our backyard. And so when my son was an infant, I was deadly scared of my son falling in and drowning. I mean, I knew that was the we didn't have a gun in the house. that would have been very, hazardous. But having a pool in the house, I knew was very, very dangerous. And so I was really vigilant and keeping sort of doors locked and making sure that he learned to swim very quickly, and that he was never out there alone without, without supervision, this kind of thing.
So just to frame this again and to describe it, the way this is calculated is it over the lifetime of 1 million people or whatever the source was.
Yeah.
These million people, 1 in 6, so 150
Yes.
some thousand died from heart disease,
Yes.
and essentially 1 in 200 from gun assault, so 50 died from.
Yeah.
That's the analysis.
Right. Yes. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
I mean, those are the CDC numbers. Are they? They're obviously not. They're not perfect. If you're asking me, is
No,
that
I
the right way to measure everything? That there's some issues there,
no,
but
I'm just more
uh,
trying to describe so people understand. So we think about statistics. What it really means is a large population that we looked at, and
yes,
here are the percentages of, or here's the probability that
yes,
heart disease. In other words, worry about heart disease and cancer and opioids. The things that you might be able to have some control over,
yes,
and that are very, very likely, and
yes,
worry less about your fear of dogs and dog bites,
yes,
which the dog dying by a dog attack is 1 in 54,000 or something like that.
yes,
Okay.
yeah. I've never. Yes.
Yeah. So to put it that way, then, as backdrop, and you mentioned a little earlier in the conversation about Japan having lessons for the U.S. and combined with what we spoke about a few years ago, is it fair to say that with the aging of the population, we've also seen, if we think of the economic pyramid, a steepening and a narrowing of the pyramid at the bottom, so there are more rich and poor, but the it's becoming taller, less in the middle.
You're talking about the population pyramid, and so we don't have very many young people, as many young people, and so it gets you have roughly the sort of same number of people at every age. And that becomes problematic when you have a system like Social Security, which is a pay-as-you-go system. So we rely on the people who are currently young and working to fund the elderly, and that works well when you have a lot more young people than you have elderly. But as the population ages and the population become pyramid, no longer is a pyramid. It looks more like the just by like a
Rectangle.
tower.
Yeah.
Then you don't have enough people working to support, right, the burden on the working people becomes much much higher,
Mm-hmm.
and Social Security becomes unsustainable in that kind of situation.
And is it fair to say that also the income levels, the pyramid has also gotten steeper, and more rich, more poor, with less in the middle?
Um, I'm not sure that certainly there's more income inequality in
That's
the
the
United
point I'm trying to.
States.
Yes.
Yeah, that's true. I haven't really thought about a connection with the demographics,
Yeah, two independent
but there could be.
thoughts.
Yeah.
Yeah. So with that in mind, you sent a few articles for me to look at, and I will let you draw the topic out. But from my perspective, it was there was a recent article about very topical, elite universities and how they're handling enrollment and what's being taught and the like, and then a couple of historical, only a few years old articles on the topic as well. So maybe just your overview on what you wanted me to draw from these three pieces, which I'll put in the post here so everyone can read themselves as well.
I guess it's my concerns about higher education. I was talking with the dean recently, and higher education has sort of come under attack. and he sort of asked me this question, like how did we become the bad guys, in all this, and 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 so we've had sort of I've been having this been talking with him about this issue, um, but yeah, I do think that my personal view is that I think we uh, the higher education, I think, has failed. Our society, the elites have sort of failed our society. One of the obligations, I think, of elites in any society is to make sure that they bring everyone in society along with them. The ideas of noblesse oblige, and that's something that we've failed to do, and we see it in the increasing sort of income inequality in the United States. So if you have a college education, certainly since 1970, people with college educations have done perfectly well. Their incomes have risen over time quite steadily. But if you only have a high school diploma, your standard of living went nowhere over the last 50 years. And so there's just been this opening, this huge gap that's wide opened up between college graduates and non-college graduates. And remember that most people in the United States do not have a bachelor's degree. So that's, so we're talking about a large segment of the population. And so I think that's where in some sense we as a society sort of failed to bring everyone along. We the elites have been happy to sort of enjoy that growth, but they left all these people behind, and I think that's why. And higher education has a lot to do with it, because I think the main problem is that tuition has just become ridiculous to get a college degree. I point to go back to 1970, when the University of California charged zero tuition, right? So back in until 1970, you could go to UCLA or UC Berkeley without paying any tuition. And so that was and then there was the GI Bill, obviously after World War II, which really helped anybody who wanted to go to college sort of go to college. But 1970, UCLA, UC Berkeley started to charge tuition. Initially, it was just a couple $100, but over time, it's just steadily gone up. And you and I are both affiliated with Pitzer College, which back in 1970, I think charged about $2,000 in tuition. They could charge, you could charge a little bit of tuition because you got UCLA down the road was free.
What is $2,000 in 2024 numbers, plus or minus?
It's only a little bit more. I'm gonna say maybe two and a half times more than that
All
in
right, so
today's
still very
dollars. But
reasonable.
yes, it's very it's still reasonable by today's
So five or
pricing.
$6,000 tuition.
Yeah.
So if I
Um,
could stop you there for a second. So the Economist article from March 8th of 24 that you sent along. So here's some of the notes I took from it. The 200 universities have 50%, one half of the 800 billion in endowments. And I don't know what that means exactly, but my question is this: how much would it cost to provide free education to, pick a number of students every year? It can't be anything close to 5 or 10% of the endowment, is it?
um, well, if you want to provide that kind of an education, so I think the cost of education has gone up a lot, and in real terms, and part of that is certainly because we offer a lot more at an American university than most universities around the world, in terms of student services, in terms of say recreational activities, phys ed facilities, those kinds of things. So it becomes more like a country club, even say the Claremont colleges. When I first arrived there, I think there were two pools on campus. I think Pomona had a pool and CMC had a pool, but now everybody has the pool. Like it's just, you're expected to have a pool for your students. So the quality of life has certainly gone up for instance, the quality of food in the dining halls is much, much better now
Yes, yes, of
than it used to
course,
be.
and
So,
of course, yeah, and
things like
some of the
that have
other.
changed, and so the
Mhm.
costs are a little bit higher.
So free may not be
Um,
the right metric, but when I look at some of the other stats that were in here, it says the America's top 50 colleges have 3 times the administrative staff and non
yeah.
non faculty, right? So three
Yes.
times the number of
Yes.
faculty. So that suggests, without picking anybody, that suggests bloating. And there's
Yes.
another stat about the size of the board of trustees and what's involved there. So decision making becomes more difficult
Hmm.
as the boards get larger. And then I look further down and it says uh, students, I've forgotten the time frame here, but 1/3 less time studying, but grade inflation has
Yeah.
continued. So when we take that in light of uh, what I know you've said to me in the past, which is we need more STEM in
Mhm.
education, and so that if we take that as axiomatic, and if we also accept that $80,000 a year to go to Harvard, or I believe the Claremont colleges, I don't know, but I'm sure it's not that far away from 60 or 70 a year.
Well,
And
no, actually, Pitzer next year will be charging roughly 90,000 for tuition, room, and board.
right, so that's
So,
out of reach of
yeah.
most.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so my thought is, is the just to frame the argument, does 800 billion in total endowments? I mean, what could you do with that, even in a bloated situation? Could there be funding programs available so that if Pitzer's incoming class is, I don't know what it is, I'm guessing it's 900, 1,000, or whatever the number might be now. It was,
I think we admit about, well, I think the incoming class is probably 270
yeah,
or 80 or something. Yeah.
I'm sorry. So total at the schools is
But
is more like
yeah,
1,100.
over a
It was
thousand, just over a
700 when
thousand
I
now.
was there. Yes, but
Yeah.
you know, could there? I mean, what would it cost to have programs where half the students in need paid, you know, could afford to go? I guess is my question: is there money in the system such that we can meet these goals of more STEM, more college education, and try to educate a public so the Social Security crisis over time, is relieved?
Um, yeah, I think we need certainly public. I think we need public. It's a decision I think the society has to make that we want to divert more of our resources toward education. But I don't think it needs to be at the we need all the perks that we have in higher education today. So in most countries around the world, certainly the majority of countries, to college education is tuition is say $2,000 or less. And in certain a lot of countries, Sweden, Germany, tuition is still free if you want to go to college. So I was told my kid that he should learn German so we could send him off to college in Germany.
Mm-hmm.
um, but and so so other countries certainly can do it. Um, and so I think we could do it as well. But it would certainly mean trimming a lot of the services that we provide at the college level. Um, I don't think are essential to an education, or sort of critical as to an education, so that we could expand access uh, to everyone in society.
I'm just reflecting on the $90,000 for for Pitzer. So when I was there, which granted is coming up on 30 years ago, uh, I believe the total for 4 years was about 50,000 plus or minus,
Yeah.
and I had Pell Grants and loans, and luckily I went into a high paying profession, and they didn't burden me for that long. Uh, but what does the demographic of the incoming Pitzer class look like if it's a $90,000 number?
certainly, so a lot of that is there's a lot of price discrimination certainly in college education. So that's a sticker price. I'm going to say Pitzer, half the students are paying the sticker price, and then the other half are getting some kinds of discounts. And so
How
so
deep
some of
are
these
the
are coming from
discounts, though?
yeah, so if you're getting some kind of financial aid or grants, so they're actually not paying they're not going to pay the full price. So effectively, we're using the tuition payments from wealthy students to subsidize the less wealthy students, which is that's something important to do. Um,
But how large is that subsidy? I guess what I'm asking is, of those that are not paying the full rate, what's the median or
it
what?
depends on what your socioeconomic background is. Certainly, there are some students that are basically get a free ride, right? So they're not paying any tuition at all. So I mean, there's that, and then some. So it depends on where you are on that spectrum.
Mhm. And that's a topic that's in the news of late, whether legacy admissions. I know
Yes,
some top-notch schools have eliminated them altogether. And I also saw that Dartmouth and Yale are reinstituting standardized testing.
yes.
So I don't know, what's going on? What do you think? Is there an answer? And, you know, how do we start to raise the overall level of education, which I think is your theme, really? If we don't, do this, and STEM being an important part of it, we've got a problem.
Yes, I do think we need to get everyone, whether you're legacy or not. Everybody should be going to getting a college education. We need to make it affordable. So access, I think, is really what's critical. The particular so the the rules I think are sort of obviously we can change some of these rules. Legacy admissions can be a problem. And then there's a lot of changes happening in athletics, um, and I think, but the focus should really be on providing a good education um, to everyone in the United States. Because so there's this, I think about athletics in particular, has created these distortions because college is so expensive. A lot of kids feel like the only way they can get into college is if they get an athletic scholarship, and so then they spend all this time sort of becoming a really good football player or basketball player, when I think their time should be spent, learning statistics, learning, some more important skills for society. But because of the way the system is set up, I understand those incentives because if they're really good at football, they can get a scholarship, they can go to college, right? And so there are opportunities there. So I think we need to sort of break up sort of that link between athletics and universities. And the United States is kind of unusual in the importance that we play that athletics plays in higher education. Like here in Japan, people care about high school baseball teams, but they don't care about college baseball teams. It's kind of interesting. So
Mm-hmm.
the high school level is a big deal, but nobody cares about the college sports teams. Um,
Interesting.
and so like why should we? Why do we really care? um,
So
so we've
what
lost,
what do
I
you
think, the
what do you
focus there.
think that's attributable to?
Um, I'm not sure.
That's,
Uh,
because at the professional level, there's real interest in baseball, yes,
yes, there is.
and at the high
But
school
college
level,
sports is
mhm,
yeah. But college sports is a big deal in the United States. I'm not sure
it's interesting. I never
why.
thought about it, and the impact of allowing college players to be paid.
Yes, that's going to
My
change the rules, right?
So
It's
my
going to change the
gut,
rules
and
of
I'm
the
going
game.
to put it out here. You may disagree fully. Is I think it's a good idea. I think it
No, I think it's a
relieves
perfectly
the
fine
burden
idea.
in a lot of things. But
Yes. And then, so what I see happening there is that if athletes now get paid for being athletes, then the universities will lose a lot of revenue from their athletic programs, and so then they're not going to they're not going to care as much about their athletic programs, and then maybe more energy will go to education. But we'll see how this all plays out.
So in that case, you're saying the university pays the athlete, and
Or
that
some
that
of the booster clubs will pay, but some,
right.
but
So that's a drain as opposed to the few stars that get endorsements and these sorts of things.
yeah,
It's actually having to pay hard dollars to build the team to recruit the players.
yeah.
Interesting. So it puts
So
an economic cost on something that had been, I don't want to call it free, but
yeah. No,
incentives
it
were
was yes.
the wrong direction.
They were enjoying the benefits. The universities have enjoyed the benefits of that for several decades. And I think that may disappear. Um, and then I think when that happens, then the university may care less about their athletic programs because uh, it's not the goose that lays the golden egg anymore. So things may change, but
Mm-hmm.
but the culture may not. I mean, there's this famous joke. There's a UC chancellor, I think, once said that I forget how I remember. He said, Our alumni said they only care about winning sports, winning football games. Our faculty, they only care about getting parking spaces." And the undergraduates, they only care about sex. And so that was the description of
Different motivations.
yeah.
I mentioned to you that I have an interest here in Los Angeles of real estate markets and specifically, and I think a lot about simply the supply and demand, and the argument I'll just use Los Angeles since it's my local example is, well, people want to come to work in the city. There are jobs here, and there's a shortage of housing, so that will continue to support housing prices. All right, that makes sense on the surface. But what that doesn't account for is within a span of a mile and a half here in my town between Beverly Hills and LA, you have homes at $2 million and homes at $50 million. Right? So that's not purely job market and selection. So to broaden the question out for you, and when I think about your bigger comment of if we don't educate the population, over time society is worse off. Social Security is a big problem. Is there a bigger dynamic to be thought about in real estate, for example, in cities where the average person and more than the average person can't afford to live there, and time wise can't spend an hour and a half commute each way? It's just physically not possible. So what happens to our society broadly when we don't educate the public? We have Social Security crisis, aging the population, and tremendous disparity in wealth. What happens to cities?
You get exactly what you described. I think you have your $50 million for homes, just which aren't all that far away from homes that are only 1 million. That's if $1 million homes are actually affordable for even $1 million homes are not affordable to the vast majority of Americans. Yeah, so we get that kind of inequality there. So we do need to reduce. I mean, I think the income inequality in the United States is just unconscionable. I mean, I don't understand why we can't just have a much more progressive tax system, and say equalize educational expenditures across the board. Um, I don't understand why are schools funded locally, like why aren't they funded at the national level, um, things like that. But yeah, I think that and we in California, I think on the real estate side, I think it has been the discussion with the NIMBY movement, really all these restrictions on the ability of developers to build more housing. Um, but I suspect that that's going to be relaxed over time, and so So then housing starts will increase and hopefully catch up to demand, and then housing prices should become more reasonable.
And do you envision the the workforce working more remotely? And I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up AI at some point in the conversation. But let's just say technology generally, since you focused me initially on a technology paper years ago. Uh, what what do you see happening as information flows differently, and just how do you view things? Will people work in
I
offices?
think
Will they work from
some,
home?
yeah, certainly there'll be a lot more flexibility, I think, in work, because we can Zoom like we're doing now. So that's that. But like, for example, even in our classrooms at the Claremont colleges, when the pandemic hit, we went dramatically from in-person classes to everything on Zoom. And now that the pandemic has subsided, we're sort of obviously reverting back to the classroom, but not completely, right? So there's still a lot of Zooming going on, and a lot of, for example, I taught my classes last year. I was teaching all my classes in person, but most of my office hours were on Zoom, right? Because it was easy to meet with students in the evenings, on weekends on Zoom, and I didn't have to go to my office to sort of meet them. And so I certainly see that kind of shift where it now just gives us this flexibility to do things in ways that we certainly couldn't do them before, and that's probably all a good thing. At the same time, I don't think things will so ever completely change to because of change it online. I always talk about I was on a search committee once and we were trying to hire a new dean of faculty, and we asked one of our candidates, and now I'm going to date myself, but we asked the question we asked was, given all this distance learning or remote learning, is there a future for liberal arts colleges? And the candidate's response was, do you think 900 numbers will ever replace sex? And for the people in the audience who don't remember, 900 numbers were these numbers that you could call on your phone, and you'd be charged for, I'll call it entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just done over the phone. And obviously, I don't think so. So I think there's something value in, say, liberal arts college is one-on-one sort of communication between students and professors, which you can't replicate online. And I really don't see that completely, sort of completely going away. I mean, yes, we'll throw in Zooming, much more Zooming in the future, but I think that one-on-one, brick and mortar stores, I don't think that experience uh, will be completely replaced.
Yes, and
Uh,
I agree. But as I look at things, I mean, you and I are having a conversation, halfway around the world, and
yes.
we know one another, although we've never met face to face,
Yes.
and we could do business together now. And
Yes.
uh, I could take a course from you live right now, and
Right.
but what I've always wondered, or this is my bias, quite simply, and maybe it's an age thing, I don't know, but live on Zoom, I feel some accountability. Watching a pre-recorded session, I don't have the same sense of interaction.
Yeah, yeah.
And I wonder, you mentioned office hours. I remember fondly sitting in the office of Professor Lehman, and or standing outside for hours at a time listening to
Mhm.
discussions. And not only
Mhm.
was that educational, but it was character building. How does
Yeah,
he handle these sorts of things? And
yeah.
do you feel that that's lost when you have Zoom type interaction
Uh,
or
yes,
enhanced?
obviously, yeah. It's not for every gain is a loss. Every loss is a gain. But I think it's a good thing to have that additional degree of freedom. Uh,
So do I.
so it's not, yeah. It's better than not having. Not having this conversation is better than not having that conversation. So,
Yeah. So back to real estate for a second. So I have a thesis that goes something like this: if, because of the changes in information flow and the ability to work remotely. If even in some, folks are going into the office 4 days a week instead of 5, right? That indicates 20% less demand. So if nothing else, that says all else being equal, those properties should be worth 20% less or some, variation of that.
Or it can be converted into some other use, right? So that it can you turn office buildings into residential apartment complexes?
Yes, and that makes sense in some cases. But as I look at, Century City, which is nearby here, and I just think through things, well, so you have companies now that what they're doing is you don't have an office. If you're only going to be there, 3 days a week, you have a space that you sign in and out. So there's, there are changes afoot, and the adjustment, I'm not sure is fully reflected in markets yet. Or let me turn that into a question. We've seen New York Community Bank as an example, and I wrote a piece where I asked, is this the canary in the coal mine? Right? Another variation of, is it different this time? And I don't know. Maybe the problems are contained, maybe they're not. But logic says to me that there's some problems in the financial system. I'm not saying it's going to come apart, but there's some problems. What do you think, as you stand back analytically and look at, real estate valuation, stock market valuation of REITs, or commercial properties, or however you would look at it? What do you think?
I'm not. I don't think I really have any thoughts thoughts there.
Well, let me frame it a little bit differently. It does make sense that if there's less demand because of remote work,
sure,
and housing prices have continued to, let's say, rise, yet we have income disparity and an underlying educational system that's, let's say, increasing that disparity, that cities, there's change coming.
Yeah.
And am I missing something in that line of thought?
I'm not. No, things are always, I think, always changing, but I'm not. This, yeah, I'm not completely following you.
And I apologize for that.
I don't
I
think.
just wonder if perhaps the writing is on the wall, and whether it was COVID that spurred it or not, remote work is much more acceptable. We have conversations like this around the world. We had big problems like Social Security and the educational system and the like. And I wonder if perhaps there's we're missing a bigger point, that fundamentally, society really should be preparing. As you said earlier, we have warning now that, and Japan is an example, that there are problems on the horizon. Are we just ignoring them?
Yeah, I think a lot of them, yes, and I think we need to, be much more proactive about any number of issues. Um, Obviously, climate change would be probably the most foremost among those, but
so
at
let
the
me
same time, there,
please, sorry.
there's every time there's an action, there's a reaction. So when there's the movement when people move out of the cities because remote work is available, that's going to lower, right, property values of rents in the cities, and we're already seeing some of that, right? I think rents are down. I think in LA this past year, and then so that will help to sort of stabilize, right, that flow, because now that the rents are a little bit lower, it's a little more attractive to stay sort of in the city. So forces are going to be going in sort of both directions.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, you'll end up with a sort of a new equilibrium somewhere.
Is there a breaking point though? where the Social Security system, literally we talk about it, but is it at risk of breaking?
I mean, I don't. Well, as it currently stands, yeah, it's certainly going to, if you're going to call it breaking, it's certainly going to has to change. But I think it's not like it's going to just disappear overnight. Um, you've got to raise Social Security taxes. You have to raise the retirement age. You have to lower the benefits. Um, so, but all of those things say gradually. So yeah, it's not going to be exactly the same as it is today. That's impossible. But it's not going to disappear. I don't think it's going to disappear either. You're not going to go from
So would a
100 to nothing.
prescription be something like,
Um,
for those people that are 30 years old today, we're going to raise the retirement age for you by 6 months or a year, and
sure.
and every year raise it a little bit for those coming up
Yeah,
until
and
we
then your
get to.
benefits will be a little bit lower than you might have thought. I'm not, I don't think your benefits will be zero, but I think it'll just be a little bit less than you might have thought. Um, and and uh, and I think Social Security taxes have to go up. In particular, right now I'm not sure what the maximum income is. I think it's around 150,000 or so. Beyond that, right? You don't at the margin, you're not paying any more into Social Security. I think that needs to be changed so that everyone is right, paying into the system. So so things will change, but it's not gonna. I'd be very surprised. It's not gonna go to zero.
Mhm.
I don't think
And even though
we'll
it's
let that
dipped of
happen.
late, life expectancies have increased substantially over the last,
Yes,
whatever
right.
time frame you look at. So I wonder, in closing, as an individual, as a voter, right? Forget about political persuasion, but as a voter, what can the individual do to try to improve things? Either for those coming behind us or in the current state. Where should we put our efforts as individual to try to affect change in either education or Social Security, or what do we do?
Um, I think we need to let people um, who care about public policy, who are serious policy wonks, that people who think about sort of these the society issues, um, and I see basically people need to be we need much more serious people in Congress and not people just sort of playing these political games. People willing to sort of sit down and think about, okay, what do we do with Social Security, and or what are we going to do about the budget deficit, the national debt, and I don't see enough serious discussion, certainly not among our political leaders, and so I'd like to see a lot more of that. Uh,
How does Japan view the U.S. now, either as from an economic standpoint or whatever you feel like expressing?
um, they certainly uh, they don't understand the fascination with Trump here. I mean, that's a sort of commonplace. Like, what the heck is going on with Americans? That's sort of the general sort of concern. And again, Japan is an important ally for Japan, and it's scary for the Japanese when that ally is not
Potentially isolationist.
yes, yes, yeah.
Mhm. And do you subscribe finally to the line of thought that says isolationism leads to trouble in the world?
Yes, yes. So I think we all need to be involved and to care about people who live in other countries, and um,
So on a positive ending, what I will say is, at Pitzer College, when I uh, when I was there, I took a course, participatory democracy,
mhm.
and it was
Okay, was that
Professor.
Dan Ward's class or
Absolutely, good memory.
okay, all right, yes.
Yes, and so I left just a year or two before you got there, I believe,
Uh,
and that Pitzer's a special place, right? Get involved in democracy. And I never felt that there was a bias, one way or the other, right? Free speech really was free speech within the realm of rules. And I guess, the positive note is there are still places where we can talk and think.
Yes. Yeah.